All right, so on that note, Josh, as you flex, we are live. We are throwing together a last-minute coverage of, I guess, just a random topic we want to talk about, and we're going to go through our Discord channel list, which is extensive, probably too extensive, probably needs to be cut down. I'm talking the Fantology Discord. And we're just going to talk through a bunch of different series, no spoilers. So zero spoilers. If you haven't read a series, we might say like character names and names of locations or like general things about what the magic is like, etc. But we're not going to do any plot spoilers, so certainly. So like very, very minor. If you're someone who doesn't want to know anything about a series, then you probably don't want to listen. But other than that, you're safe to listen to this. So Josh, what do you think? Where should we get started here?
Well, I think we should start where most people start. So say you've read Harry Potter and you loved Harry Potter, but you really haven't picked up another book since, but you're wanting to get back into fantasy. So let's talk about maybe some good series that person might enjoy.
Okay, so this is someone who read Harry Potter when they were a teenager, basically someone our age, probably involved in the Harry Potter craze, and has maybe like read Harry Potter 10 times over and swears by it, but now we're saying like, hey, there's other stuff other than Harry Potter that you could maybe try as well. And where would that person go?
So this is the person that has the Deathly Hallows like tattooed on their wrist, and we love Harry Potter here at Fantology, but yeah, let's branch out a little bit. So I think that the natural place for somebody who liked Harry Potter to go is, I think, Mistborn.
Yeah, I think so. And we talked about this in our Mistborn review. We've only done one Mistborn review thus far. I mean, there are 6 books out, 7 if you count Secret History. But we covered the first one, and that was a big selling point of the series. That's something that Daniel Green has talked about a lot as well.
Yeah, so I think it has a young protagonist. It has some good magic in it. It's well fleshed out. The magic system is really presented to you really easily. Like everybody can understand it. The writing is not super detailed. It's very digestible writing. Yeah, so
Mistborn is Sanderson's first series. This is not his first book. His first book was Elantris, and then he published the Mistborn trilogy, and then he got recruited to finish The Wheel of Time. So Mistborn was the series that Harriet, Robert Jordan's widow, liked enough to say, hey, Brandon, I trust you to finish The Wheel of Time, which is, I would say, the second most Hallmark fantasy series out there behind Lord of the Rings. So it was pretty impressive to, someone, a professional in the industry. Robert Jordan's wife was his editor as well. And like you were saying, Josh, it's got a fantastic magic system. It's got great characters. We have a young female protagonist. I know that's one thing that really hooks people right away, because we've talked about this on Fantology, that there aren't enough female protagonists. And Vin in Mistborn is awesome, and someone that really people of all walks of life, I think, can connect with. So really no reason to just try Mistborn if you liked Harry Potter and liked kind of the YA fantasy scene.
Yeah. I know that there was like a push to get YA covers or covers that would appeal to YA audience. I don't know if I would classify as Mistborn as YA, but it does have YA themes. And yeah, I really liked it. It was kind of my first passion that I really loved in fantasy. So like I read Harry Potter, and then I read Lord of the Rings. I read all these things like when I was a kid, but then you guys introduced me to Wheel of Time. I read the first like 5 Wheel of Time books, and I liked them, but I got burnt out. And then I picked up Mistborn and fell in love with it.
And many have, and it's really kind of catapulted Sanderson's career to the next level. So yeah, so let's say Mistborn is our first recommendation. That's where we would push someone who wants to get into more of the adult fantasy scene. Mistborn is maybe the first one to try. And like you say, it kind of straddles line with YA, but there's enough more mature themes and violence. There's not much by the way of content. It's a PG-13 rated book, I would say. So it's a pretty natural progression.
Yeah. And it's not too long either. That's what I like about it too. Like the initial trilogy, the books are hefty, 600-700 pages maybe. But it's 3 books. The one negative thing I would say is that I think if I remember right, there's some pacing issues, and the writing is, some might say bland, like there's not a whole lot of real flowery language.
A little bit, yeah. Uses.
Yeah. But it's digestible, it's bland, but it's digestible. So.
Yeah, I think that's fair criticism, and it is. It's the second trilogy that he came out with, and I think if we're expecting greatness right off the bat from an author, you're fooling yourself. So yeah, but Mistborn is our recommendation. I would say let's branch out from Harry Potter in a different way. So before I read Mistborn, I read Name of the Wind first.
Okay. When
I was maybe 16 or 17. Picked that up. This was probably in the midst of the Harry Potter craze, so I'm guessing Deathly Hallows probably wasn't out yet. Might need to fact check myself. I think Name of the Wind came out in like 2008. When did Deathly Hallows come out? Around the same time?
Deathly Hallows came out, I believe, yeah. No, it was earlier than 2008. It's like 2006.
Okay, so maybe I'm lying to myself a little bit. But the point is, as a young Harry Potter fan, Name of the Wind drew me in right away. There is a magic school. I don't think we're spoiling too much by saying that. And there's a protagonist that you can really latch onto. And in this case, the writing is really good. Like it's top-notch fantasy writing. It draws you in right away. And this was a book that I binge read in like 2 days and was unable to do anything else. I found it in my grandparents' house on vacation. And I was basically AWOL the rest of the vacation because I was holed up reading this book. I was a big nerd when I was younger. Still am. I mean, no surprise, right?
Yeah. I really like Name of the Wind as well. I think that it's really hard to recommend with knowing that it might not be finished. But having said that, I got my wife is about to finish it. She's like 80% of the way through it. So I made her read it, and she's enjoyed it. So it's hard to recommend in the sense that we might not ever get an ending. You just kind of have to be realistic about that. Like we just might not.
It's tough, right? And this is a hot button topic in the fantasy book verse right now with all the controversy coming out with Rothfuss's editors saying she doesn't really think, or she has some doubts to as if it will ever be finished. And that's hard to brush aside, right? Like this is his editor coming out on a public forum saying that she doesn't think that the author's written in 6 years. That's a bad sign. And the second book was published in 2010. I'm pretty sure on that. So that's a solid 10 years.
Either 2010 or early 2011. But yeah.
Yeah. So we haven't seen anything. Like you say, that's a little hard to recommend. I would still recommend the first book, no hesitation at all, because I think it's a fantastic book in of itself. I would maybe have a little bit of doubts. Like if someone was like, oh yeah, I like the first book. If they didn't love it, I don't know if I would really push them into Wise Man's Fear, because knowing that the third is a huge question mark means that maybe like the second, which was not quite as strong as the first, maybe that's not quite worth someone's time if they didn't love the first one. But I loved both, so I think that's what.
I think that's, you just have to tell them, huge caveat. One of the best books, one of the best fantasy books out there. You might not get a resolution in the series. Proceed at your own risk. It's like, that's what it is.
Yeah. Sadly, that's kind of the state of things. We're hoping for news. It's kind of concerning that Rothfuss has been like radio silence since this came out. Hardly anything. So that's concerning. You think if this wasn't the case that he had been writing, he would come out and tell his fans, like, I've been writing and here I'm trying to help you guys, but nothing.
Well, yeah, but maybe not. Maybe he just wants to not get involved with the whole thing. I don't know.
Yeah, could be.
Whatever. I don't really want to get into that right now. I think it's a great book, and read it if you want to read a great book without expectations of.
Yeah, and there's so many reasons to love the book. Honestly, the only person I know that doesn't like the book is Daniel Green. So we've already said his name twice, one for good things, one for bad things.
Well, you're allowed to not like the book. I don't know. Like, I feel like in his videos, he has like 3 videos on it, and I feel like he gives like valid reasons why he doesn't like it. So
yeah, that's fair. Okay, so let's backtrack a little bit. So let's say rather than starting at Harry Potter, you're someone who read Lord of the Rings and you've watched the movies and you're way into Lord of the Rings. This is your jam, you know everything. You've read the Silmarillion, you're way into the Legendarium, whatever it may be. And you would like to read more in the fantasy realm. Where would you go, Josh, for someone like this?
I think Wheel of Time is the best starting place for that person.
Natural, right?
Yeah.
Frankly, I would wonder why they haven't read Wheel of Time yet, if there's someone that I described.
Well, Wheel of Time is intimidating. You go to the bookstore or the library and you see like a whole shelf, like a literal shelf, right, of all the Wheel of Time books, and you're like, well, I can't do that, right?
Right.
But I'd say just go for it. You start,
So I would say Wheel of Time. I mean, the entirety of the first book, well, at least the first half of the first book, is pretty much Robert Jordan paying homage to Tolkien. Like, the way it starts is so reminiscent of the scenes in the Shire, and as our heroes run away and they're pursued by the ringwraiths. It's no mystery that Jordan was completely inspired by Tolkien, and there's a lot more than just what I described that's comparable between the Wheel of Time and Lord of the Rings. I would say it's almost like the Wheel of Time is, maybe this is a bad comparison, but it's what it would have been if Tolkien had written out in story form all of the events that he kind of outlined in some of his Legendarium books almost. I don't know. Is that a fair comparison?
I do not know. I'm not well versed enough in the Legendarium, but the world is expansive enough that it feels like that. It feels like if you went to a random inn off the side of a road in a portion of the map that the characters may have just mentioned, you would Jordan would have known how to describe what was going on in that inn at that moment, right?
Yeah, it's a world that by the time you finish the series, you're totally immersed in. I could point you to a place on the map, and you could say, that's Ered Doman, and the Domani people are like this, etc. It's incredibly detailed. Characters are fantastic. I mean, there are some things that the writing's a little flowery at times, and there is a slog, people like to say, where at least a couple of the books, depending on who you talk to, are pretty slow, and there's 15 books, and I guess in my opinion, there maybe don't need to be 15. It could have been cut down a little bit.
Yeah, so here's the thing about that is we are in a time when binging is the norm, right? Like when we just want to binge everything and we want more of tighter storylines, right? And I feel like modern fantasy authors are giving us that. But when Jordan was writing, he's like, yeah, I'm going to write these books for the next 20, 30 years. And who cares if there's a lot of them and if they're long? Because if you get one book every year, that's an easy book to read. If you're trying to read 15 books in a year that are all huge, then that's a harder thing to do, right?
Yeah, that's fair. And maybe, the modern age is not exactly what you would like you say, Josh. If you like binging, Wheel of Time might be tough for you.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of Wheel of Time to binge. So maybe if you just want a lot of content to binge, then maybe. But it's not exactly super fast paced,
Right. You have to be willing to enjoy the grind and enjoy going on the journey with the characters. It's very much a journey before destination series.
Yeah. So, okay, what about this one, Stephen? This is the antithesis of the Lord of the Rings fan you mentioned. But what about somebody who got swept up in the Game of Thrones craze, but has never really read a book outside of what they read for school? And they hated reading in school, but they loved Game of Thrones.
So just the TV show? They haven't read the Game of Thrones books?
They haven't read the books. They just got that an HBO subscription. They got the hype. They went all in. They can name all the actors and they follow all the Instagram accounts, but they have not.
Okay.
They think they hate reading.
They think they hate reading. Okay, I can go in two directions here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go, and maybe this depends on the type of person it is, because I think there's a lot of wiggle room there. But I'm going to say either Red Rising or First Law. What do you think?
I mean, I'm kind of wondering why I didn't just say Game of Thrones books, the Song of Ice and Fire.
No. Okay, sure. I thought both were out. I thought you were trying to expand.
No, but you know what? I might not even recommend those because those are kind of hard books to read. Like you have the advantage of knowing the beats for most of the series that's out so far, right? Like you know the story beats for most of it, but it's not like the writing in those books is like super accessible. You know,
yeah, I wouldn't recommend Song of Ice and Fire to someone unless they'd already read a different fantasy series and liked it. I think that's one that people give up on. People are like, yeah, I really love the show. And then they read the book and they're like, oh yeah, I know the characters. And then by the time they get in the middle, they're like, oh man, the show is a little more like exciting and sexy than the books are. And they kind of give up. I know people who've done that.
Well, that was even me, honestly. So I read the first book and watched the first season. And I was like, I'm only going to do one of these things because I don't like, it's just the way I wanted to experience it. And so I was like, I'm going to watch the series because it was more entertaining to me. And I'm not saying that that's like the right opinion to have, but now I'm waiting until at least the next book comes out to read the rest of the series.
Yeah, I think, like I said, the series is great. I love Song of Ice and Fire. I've read all the books. I'm looking forward to Winds of Winter when it does come out, but I don't think it's for everyone. I think there's a lot of people who are just not as into reading and would start somewhere else, would enjoy a simpler read like Red Rising or a book that's a similar feel like First Law, but is like a little bit easier to sink your teeth into.
I really like your First Law recommend. The only thing with First Law, and I say this like as a fan of the series, is that I think that the pacing in the first book is a little weak.
Yeah, I know fans of the series don't love the Blade itself. Like it's not their favorite. They like the book, but compared to other books, it's not their favorite.
Yeah. So, but I do think that's a great recommendation. I think that if they can get past the first book, then there's a lot of to love in First Law. And I think that would be a great recommend.
So I think First Law, the writing is fantastic. I would say, honestly, it's probably my second favorite writing quality behind Rothfuss. I love Abercrombie's writing. It's just so funny and perfectly dark. Like it's for sure a dark book. It's of the grimdark genre. So that's maybe why I say if you like Game of Thrones, this would be a thing for you. Characters are going to die. They're going to die in kind of gruesome ways. And if that's going to bother you, then First Law is not for you. It's definitely not for everyone. But if you're someone who really kind of latches onto that and can find the dark humor really engaging, then First Law for sure is an easy recommend.
Nice.
Okay, so let's talk.
I have another one for you.
Well, hang on. So Red Rising. So
okay.
Why?
Okay.
Do you think that recommend kind of fits in with Game of Thrones at all?
So I'm gonna offend people, but I didn't love the first book, and I stopped reading the second book.
That's right. You're that person.
I'm that person.
Yeah, I forgot that you were that person. You haven't even read this. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is a wrong opinion. This is a wrong opinion.
Yeah.
You need to give it another shot. I think you're willing to give it another shot, right?
So here's what happened with my Red Rising is I was reading Red Rising and Dark Tower at the same time. And Dark Tower was just so much more captivating to me. And I just wanted to read Dark Tower. And then I started to want to read just Other King. And then I just have not felt compelled to jump back into Red Rising yet. And so I don't know.
So I haven't read any Dark Tower, so I don't know if I can respond to that. But I'll say that the reason why I chose Red Rising for a Game of Thrones watcher is for someone who hasn't read a lot or that's not quite their thing, Red Rising is very accessible. It's bordering on YA, although there are some more adult themes, but the writing is very accessible. The characters are pretty easy. to kind of latch onto. It's very fast paced, probably the fastest paced book that we will talk about. It's sci-fi, it's not fantasy. So maybe even like an Ender's Game or card fan might find Red Rising something that they like. And then more than that, like it's fairly gritty. Like there's some dark things that are happening to characters, although not nearly like grimdark like you'd see in First Law.
See, that's where I think I disagree. I think my issue with the first book was that it was so all over the place. Like I felt like it was kind of trying to be like a YA, like a Hunger Games type thing, but then there were some really dark things that happened, like really dark. And I don't want to spoil things, so I'm just gonna leave it there. Yeah, but like there's like sexual assault. There's
Hunger Games is fairly dark when you think about it.
But yes, but Hunger Games, it has a dark premise, but I don't think it gets like as intense as Red Rising does.
Sure. And neither one are like super on camera with the dark stuff, I would say, but definitely topics that are touched on.
Yeah. So here's one for you, Stephen. What about somebody that got swept up in the Sanderson craze and has consumed pretty much all the Cosmere content and has maybe like read, when they were a kid, read Harry Potter and Hunger Games, stuff like that. So they knew that they liked reading, got exposed to Sanderson, but hasn't read outside of him really.
Man, there's a lot of ways to go with this. So I guess I was wondering when we were going to touch on Sanderson. I mean, there's no way that Fantology can avoid Sanderson. We're total fanboys. But so you're not even going to say when do you recommend Sanderson? We're assuming people are going to get into it. We talked about Mistborn.
This is just for that guy, right? That guy that maybe they read Harry Potter. Somebody recommended. I'm like focusing on that guy. They read Harry Potter. Then somebody recommended Mistborn. They like devoured Mistborn, loved it. So they branched out, are current on, all of the Cosmere stuff, and they need to scratch their itch and get, another in their hands.
Okay. So there's a lot of ways to go with this one. This is a good one. So, okay, I'm going to go, I'll start with two directions that come to mind right away, and then we'll see where it goes from here. So I'm going to say either Lightbringer or Powder Mage.
Okay.
Yeah, your reaction?
Yeah. So I think that those are both great recommends. So Lightbringer is where I think I would go with that, because it's different enough from Sanderson that you're getting like a different style. Whereas Powder Mage, I think, is like not different enough from Sanderson. Like I feel like if you've just read Sanderson, like I would want to expose somebody to like a little bit different of a palette,
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think I would go with Lightbringer over Powder Mage, having not finished the series. I'm in book 3 right now. So
of Powder Mage, you mean?
Of Powder Mage, yeah.
Yeah, and there's 2 trilogies there, so you're in book 3 of the first trilogy. Yeah, so I'm with you there. I think there's a lot of similarities. I do like Lightbringer a little bit more overall. I really liked Powder Mage as well. I mean, this is tough. Lightbringer's a little stronger. I think it's unique enough. I mean, it's got a very Sanderson-esque magic system, but the characters are really strong. It's got some of the best gray characters that I've seen. It's got a lot of twists. It's got a lot of nice villains. The ending is pretty controversial. Some people hated it. Some people loved it. I'm like 90% loved it, although there were some things that I had an issue with. And both are completed series, so these are easy recommends.
Yeah. So I haven't finished Powder Mage, so I don't feel like even the first trilogy. So I don't know how well the endings are done with that. I think that the Sanderson's strongest point are his endings, and he's only ended Mistborn. But I thought that was. Here's kind of a hot take. I think that Mistborn has the best ending to any fantasy work that's completed right now. Era 1.
It's a decent take. That was a mind-blowing ending.
Yeah. So keeping that spoiler free, I think that a reason to read Mistborn is the ending. And and all of his endings in his books are all really good. I feel like Powder Mage, the endings are just okay
That's fair.
to the individual books so far. The two I've read, like they're good. So maybe they're like okay to good, but they're not like Sanderson endings, you know?
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think there are some things you can certainly nitpick on Powder Mage. So Powder Mage is written by Brian McClellan, who's actually a student of Sanderson's while he was at BYU, and has been recommended. Like on the book jacket, there's a blurb from Sanderson. It's got a Sanderson-esque magic system. It's got some really good characters, and it's got a unique setting in that it's a flintlock fantasy. So if you look at the cover, you'll know there's a guy with a gun sitting there. So there's some guns involved. It's more of that. It's not like your medieval fantasy. So there's a lot of uniqueness to it. There's a lot to love. The plots do get a little convoluted and like aren't quite the avalanche that we expect in a Sanderson at the end. I mean,
yeah, but they're good. I like them.
And I thought the second trilogy, which is called Gods of Blood and Powder, some of the same characters. I thought that trilogy was better than his first trilogy, which is great. He's trending in the right direction. He's writing another series called The Glass Immortals, I want to say. Fact check me on that. I'll be impressed with myself if I pulled that out of the hat. But I'm looking forward to that. McClellan is the guy to watch, I think.
Fair.
Okay, so what else do we need to cover here? So maybe we need some recommendations for those of us. What series do we need to recommend? I want to throw I want to throw something at Dresden. Who do we recommend Dresden to?
Okay, Dresden is for urban fantasy people. You know, maybe somebody that like read Harry Potter, but they like don't really like the idea of going like horses and medieval style fantasy.
Yeah, so they read Harry Potter and they prefer it to take place in our time.
Right. Let's not forget that Harry Potter is like urban fantasy. You know, it's not epic fantasy. It is urban fantasy, right? Like, so I think that maybe Harry Potter and maybe somebody that's like read detective novels, maybe somebody that's read like even Robert Ludlum. Am I saying his name right? Like somebody that's read, more contemporary novels, but is looking for a bit of a spicy magic in their novels.
Yeah. So Dresden, it's about a wizard in Chicago in our day. He is a private investigator, and he takes on a variety of different enemies from different walks of the supernatural community, and it's fantastic. It's very witty. There's a lot of just kind of fun puns and references to our world. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and we usually describe it as a fun romp through Chicago.
Yeah.
And there's 16 books out.
Here's one for you, Stephen. What would you recommend for somebody that is like a pretty big sci-fi nerd? Like they've read like Card, they've read Three Body Problem, they've read, kind of like the mainstays in sci-fi, but they're looking to get more into the fantasy side of things.
Okay, so more of a crossover. I'm not a huge sci-fi guy. I'm gonna admit, I'm definitely not an expert. I would recommend Three Body Problem to someone who liked sci-fi. That's a fantastic series written by a Chinese author that's fairly new, fairly new to English, at least. It was just translated over. And that's got some mind-blowing stuff in it. So if they've already read that, and now they want to do more fantasy, I mean, can we say the Expanse books?
Yeah, so I haven't read the Expanse books. I know you've started, right?
No, I haven't. I've actually started the show. There's some pretty big Expanse fans on our Discord. And I guess maybe quick shout out if you like Fantology and you want to chat with us more about any of these series, join our Discord. And we have channels for all of these different series. So please let us know more about the details of your beloved series. We're just fans of all these, definitely not experts. But as far as the Expanse goes, this is a series that I really want to read. Just haven't got to it yet. There's too long. My TBR list is too long.
Yeah. I think that somebody that's really into sci-fi, they might like for some reason, Lightbringer again just kind of stands out to me as like it's not really sci-fi, but it has um, some cool
It's more of
ways
a
that they use
hard
magic.
magic. Yeah.
Yeah, they use magic in some cool ways that like seem not. It's not realistic because it's magic, but like um, it's just a cool way that it's done. So
Yeah, it's like if I could access the magic, I feel like I should be able to do all these things. That it seems super realistic to the point where you're like, oh yeah, I can use magic in this way, so I can do this and this, and right away.
you know what? Actually, let me kind of revise that too, because I really like Lightbringer, but I also want to say that a good recommendation for somebody that's read sci-fi but wants to start branching into fantasy might be Dark Tower, because there are some sci-fi elements to it, like
Okay.
some pretty on the nose sci-fi elements to it, and there are a ton of fantasy elements to it. And anything more would be spoilers, and I don't want to spoil things for you. But it's a dark series. It's written by Stephen King. I would recommend reading some Stephen King books because there's some characters from some of his other books that appear in it. But if you just want to go in blind, then that's okay too. It's handled well enough that like you could still enjoy it. But there are some sci-fi things in there with it still being like a fantasy series.
Again, this is another series that's on my TBR. I've heard enough discussion about it. In fact, you and I have an episode out about the series where I just kind of interview you and get your opinion, Josh. So I know you loved it, and I know the characters are fantastic, and I know a few other small details. So I am going to read it eventually. But
yeah,
man, that TBR list just keeps on getting longer and longer.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so at what point, man, there's some other series here that we want to like recommend all the other series. I think that's kind of what we're doing. We're just trying to lead each other into this. So maybe I'll just like throw out a series and you tell me at what point you'd recommend this series to someone. Okay. So at what point would you recommend, how many of the Farseer books did you read, the Robin Hobb books?
So I read the first trilogy. I haven't really continued on. Yeah.
So who would you recommend that type of series to?
Okay, so I feel like I read it at the perfect time in my fantasy reading journey. So I had kind of read it after I had read all Sanderson stuff, after I had read, no, it was before I had finished The Wheel of Time. So I'd read like half of The Wheel of Time and was kind of looking for something outside of The Wheel of Time and outside of Sanderson that had.
You'd probably read Name of the Wind as well, and this is very much a coming of age type tale.
Yeah. So I think somebody that has read a lot of fantasy and somebody that's not just looking to stay up with all the modern trends and maybe wants maybe a little bit of taste of like classic fantasy. I don't know if it could be considered classic because it was published like in the 90s.
Yeah, it started in the 90s. So there's a lot of different elements to this series. There's actually 16 books in the entirety of the Realm of the Elderlings, and it's divided into 5 different series. I've read them all. I really like them. Ryan and I have both read them all. Actually, no, that's not true. Ryan hasn't read them all. He's just read the Fitz and the Fool books, which are kind of the main core to it. And there is, again, like an extended universe with 2 other side series that have some characters. These are really underrated books, I'm going to say. It's, like I said, it starts off with the coming of age, but then it becomes so much more to it. It's a little grimdark in just the way that some things happen to characters, but not as much as First Law. And
not nearly as much as First Law. Not nearly.
Not as much, but there's some fairly dark things that are happening to characters that you care about. And it's got some classical fantasy elements, like you're saying. I think it would appeal to a wide range of people, and I kind of wish more people would read them. Yeah,
so I think that there is like weirdness happening with the fantasy series, like with fantasy genre in general in the 90s, right? Like everyone was kind of trying to recreate Wheel of Time, but just had really tropey things going on. I feel like for the most part, like that was what 90s and fantasy was like trying to get another Wheel of Time, trying to follow the similar beats and tropes. But this is a series that like broke out of that, I'd say.
This and Song of Ice and Fire, obviously.
Yeah, obviously, but not very. I don't feel like very many series like really broke out of that.
If you say, like, if you consider, like, if you're trying to come up with your stereotypical fantasy book, it's got some kind of cover with real cheesy artwork, with maybe like a bare-chested man. I mean, not even romance, but just like some really muscly looking dude doing magic or like wielding a sword. And it's always kind of like that. And frankly, none of those books are books that I've ever really enjoyed.
Yeah. But I really like the first trilogy. Stephen, who are you going to recommend Malazan to?
Yeah, that's kind of that's the elephant in the room right now, I think, at this point. Malazan Man, okay. Someone who has read a lot, not all the series we talked about, but they've got it. They need to have read several of the series we've already talked about and liked them because they liked the detail and depth of worlds that are created. And if you like fantasy for that reason and are willing to invest in another long series that takes it to an entirely different level, then I would recommend Malazan to you. But I will not recommend Malazan to you unless you have met those prerequisites.
So the best way to describe Malazan is it's like a 700 level college course, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you can take like your 101 is like Harry Potter. Your like 201 is like maybe Mistborn. Your 301 is maybe Stormlight Archive. Your, and then like you have Malazan, like just.
It's way beyond anything else. It's really not all that comparable to anything else, other than saying like, okay, let's say you took a bunch of your favorite series, mashed them up, made them 10 times more complex.
Yeah, and
also, we're not going to tell you as the reader what's going on. You have to figure it out.
Or what you should be paying attention to, what details are important, and what just are in the scene just to be in the scene, and not have. I don't want to get roasted because I've only read the first 2 books, but not have like the best characters ever. Like it is not a character-driven story.
It's not supposed to be. There are good characters. There's characters that I really like from individual books, but and I'm with you, Josh. I've only read the first 2, so we're probably not super qualified to talk this series. But my understanding is they're going to switch up quite a bit, and it's more about the plot.
Yeah, and so you can't be a reader that is compelled by characters. You can't be a reader that is just going to kind of idly sit by and let the story wash over you. And you have to really be into it. And yeah. All right. I don't know. What other recommends do we need to touch on, Stephen?
Well, so a few other series that I like we haven't talked over. They're maybe not quite as well known. So let's talk some Locke Lamora.
Ooh, how have we missed? Okay, it's hard because Locke Lamora is not a series that like is going to be anybody's first. Like if they like something, then you go to Locke Lamora. Like I feel like Locke Lamora is a series that you are a fan of fantasy, so you read Locke Lamora, right? Is that a good way to describe it?
You probably don't pick it up right away. It's probably something that's been recommended after you've read some others. But I think it makes sense in your fantasy progression pretty naturally. So I would say this is, again, a book that you need to be comfortable with a little more content with. So, but it also hits on some more classical fantasy themes. Like the characters are real good. The plot isn't anything that's super complex. Like you're able to dive into the story pretty well. And the story's really good. It's more of kind of a heist story and almost like a buddy cop story a little bit with 2 of the main characters. Really memorable. There's 3 books out so far. There's going to be more. We're hoping. This is another one where you got that caveat of it's not finished.
But you have an end. You have an end, though. Like,
do you though? Like you kind of have an end.
There's a cliffhanger.
It's a huge cliffhanger, though.
But they have wrapped up a lot of arcs within the books. Like, I honestly did know that there was going to be a 4th book.
You're right in that there is an arc that's finished, and the series has been described as like these three that have come out so far are supposed to be the prequel to the main trilogy, or sorry, the main series that he wants to write eventually, that Scott Lynch wants to write eventually. And so we're hoping for that. We've been expecting the Throne of Emberlane for a while, and the word is that the manuscript is ready to go. It's like kind of tied up in editorial process or something. Anyway, we're hoping for a fourth book soon. It's been a while for that one as well. But yeah, there's like kind of a complete arc. Enough so that I don't hesitate to recommend it to people. They're like, give me a good series.
Yeah. I think that this is one of the best duels. We're doing duels right now in our fantasy poll on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's got to be the best duo. Like, it is so compelling. They do so well together. I love them. Meaning Locke and John, like they just they're so believable, you know, in their character work, how they're portrayed, their interactions with each other. You just feel like this is two friends chatting and getting into sticky situations.
Yeah, and it's fun to be along with them on the ride.
Yeah.
Okay, where do you recommend the Veil and Sorna books, or do you?
So
this is another tricky one.
I've only read the first two because you were so disappointed by the third that I didn't want to have my disappointment come out.
Yeah,
so I just didn't read it.
The first two being Bloodsong and Tower Lord.
Yeah, and I like Tower Lord more than I think a lot of people did. I thought it was exciting.
Yeah, so Bloodsong for me was 5 stars. Loved it. One of my very favorite books. We've covered this on Fantology. Actually covered this with The Hero's Journey, which is another one of our friend podcasts. And that's one of my all-time favorite books. There's some weaknesses to it, I'll admit. But at the time that I read it, and I've read it a few times now, just loved every page. Veil and Sorna is your typical fantasy hero that can do everything really well. And some people are going to have problems with that, but I tend to love those types of things. So for the same reasons that I love Name of the Wind, I really love Bloodsong. And the series, unfortunately, kind of takes a nosedive after that. Tower Lord was 4 stars, definitely worth reading, not nearly as good. If you want some humor, go find my review of Queen of Fire on like Fantasy Book Critic or something. And I just roast it with 0 scruples given out. Just hated the book, man. Like, it was such a lame ending to the trilogy. But I will give Anthony Ryan, the author, this. He followed that up with another couple books, a duology, as they're called, which you don't see very often. But this duology is called The Raven's Blade, and Black Song, the second one, is actually sitting right in front of me, just came out earlier this month. And he redeemed himself quite a bit. From the nosedive the series took, the next two, The Wolf's Call and A Black Song, are pretty good. And so if you're someone who was unfortunate enough to have read Queen of Fire and are like, oh man, the first book was so good, then read the next two because they're good.
So, okay, where are you going to recommend Licanius?
Licanius is more kind of on the edge. Like, the series was good. I wasn't very high on the ending, the third book, which came out end of 2019. I was pretty high on the first two, so I was a little disappointed by the end of this one. I would say it's a series where if you like Sanderson, if you like Wheel of Time, this has a lot of your classical fantasy feels with some twists and with some good characters. It's more of like not a YA, but again, kind of more of that feel. It's a good series.
Nice.
What about you?
Yeah, it's just hard because nobody really talks about it, right? Like, I think it is in a sense underappreciated because I think it does a lot of things really well. In particular, one thing which I don't want to say because some of my people might consider a spoiler, but it takes a typical trope that is not usually done very well and does it very well. Yeah. So for that reason, and if you're interested in what that is, just look it up and you'll find out what it is. But I think it's underrated, you know, like, I think if you like Lightbringer a lot and you like kids going out and figuring out this world that they live in, like, it's a good story. It's a more modern coming of age. Seems like some of the more modern fantasy is going away from the coming of age. This doesn't, and it's good for that. Yeah. All right. Okay, so let's close with talking about, like, where's fantasy going?
What are some new? Oh, and we have a listener that says they're starting that series this year. Okay, sweet. Let us know what you think of it.
Yeah, and I really liked it. I read the first book so fast, and I think that you're going to like it. If you have any questions, jump on our Discord and we can try and answer those for you, because it is easy to get lost sometimes in that series. So
a little bit, yeah. There's some definite complexity to it. Okay, so let's talk. Where is fantasy going? And I think two series that are going to help us answer that question are the Poppy War and what's the name of the Rage of Dragon series?
yeah. Oh dang.
Yeah,
Rage of Dragons.
Rage of Dragons, first book. There's a series name too.
Yeah. And I actually stalled out. I was loving Rage of Dragons so much, and I have my Kindle literally sitting right by me, and I'm ready to read again tonight because my wife is out and the kids are asleep. And after this is done, I'm like gonna jump back into Rage of Dragons because it was like quickly becoming a top, like nudging its way into my top 10. And
but you stalled out, so just because of life reasons, or because it was like getting a little boring, or
no, it wasn't getting boring at all. Just life reasons. Just things got kind of crazy. Like we started recording more, and I'm committed to reading this book, not listening to it for whatever reason. Like I've just read half of it, and I don't really want to start listening to it now.
You've heard enough good things about it where it seems like one that you really want to digest, I'm assuming.
Yeah. And I read like the first 50% in like a week, and just life got a little bit crazy after that. And so hopefully I can finish it in the next few weeks. But
this is a series that I'm also committed to read. I'm committed to reading Rage of Dragons in the next 3 months, because the second book comes out and I want to be ready for that one. Because I heard a ton of great things. So excited to learn more.
This is judging by the first half of the first book, but it is kind of a coming of age tale. It takes place with more of like African influences, and and it has dragons. Like, it's not a spoiler because it's on the first page. But
I'm joking.
So there are dragons, and the magic system seems cool. I hope it gets fleshed out really well. It seems like it is, and you're learning more and more about it. And just there's so many good tropes that are done so well in this book. And so I'm going to finish it. Maybe tonight. I might pull an all-nighter because it's really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and then I think to go along with this series, the other series that I think represents where fantasy is going is the Poppy War. And I highlight these ones because they both heavily feature different cultures, not just your typical European fantasy book setting. And that's where things are going. I mean, just look out in the world. Look where things are going in the world. We're looking for more acceptance and more mainstream use of other cultures, and the fantasy book world is embracing that as well. And I love it. I'm excited to. I really like the first Poppy War. This is another Eye of the Dragon Republic, the second book, sitting right in front of me as well, that I'm planning on reading before the third comes out in November as well. So this is another series that's a strong recommend.
Yeah, I really like Poppy War. I think I've cooled on it a little bit since I read the first book. I haven't read the second yet, but I did like it. And the ending I really enjoyed. Although I know the ending is controversial, but I agree with
it's way controversial.
Yeah. But the thing about Poppy War that I really liked is it mirrors like real life events, like not directly. It's not like using names of places in the real world, but like, what events it's mirroring.
Yep. Right? It's speculative fiction.
Yeah.
There's no secret. So it's heavily rooted in Asian history, we'll say.
Yeah. Cool. With another female protagonist, kind of younger female protagonist.
Yeah. Whose name rhymes with Ben.
Yeah. But it gets dark too. That was one thing I didn't love about the series, was the kind of all over changes in like tone.
Yeah.
I guess you could say. Like there could be just not a lot going on, and then like war crimes being committed that are like atrocious, and that like are really graphic and are still sticking in my mind. Like it's 8 months later after having read it. So that was, I don't mind grimdark. Like I read grimdark, but it just seemed like things would come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'm with you. All right. Well, we are unfortunately at a hard stop. Thanks for the comments. I wish we had time to respond to these, but this was fun, Josh, and hopefully listeners enjoy kind of this just broad overview of where fantasy's at. So if you like Fantology, check us out at Fantology Books at www.fantologybooks.com, and please hop on our Discord and chat with us more about your favorite series and let us know your opinion on our takes here. We are just fans, not experts.
But there are experts on the Discord for most of these series. So.
Yeah, and we're experts in some things too. But all right, I'm going to wrap up now. Thanks, Josh. See you next time.
Thanks, Stephen.